Today on How It's Made. Straight razors. Having a close shave without cutting corners. Black pudding. Not one of your 5 a day, but lovely nonetheless. Steering wheels. Helping us go round the bend. And inorganic pigments. Painting the town red, or blue, or green for that matter. But first... In a world dominated by high-tech gadgetry, the low-tech straight razor still has a cutting edge. It can be reused endlessly, and it has a traditional appeal, one that actually dates back to ancient Egypt, where there were straight razors made of solid gold. Shaving with an unguarded, super-sharp knife has always been for the tough guys. To use it, a man needs steely concentration and a steady hand. Production begins with steel cylinders heated in a furnace until they're soft and malleable. A forging hammer then pounds the cylinders into dies to shape them. A punch cutter trims the edges and cuts the shape into 2 blades. From a steel rod to a flat razor shape in just a few steps. The straight razors are then fed into another die, one at a time. A weight forces the razor into the die, a process which both improves the shape and condenses the metal to strengthen it. A worker dips a rack of about 50 blades in graphite powder, followed by molten lead. The lead adds more strength to the steel. He knocks off the lead, which slides off easily because of the graphite undercoat. The razor blades catch fire as he immerses them in oil to cool them. He transfers the blades to a sieve and tosses sawdust into it. The sawdust soaks up the oil and graphite residue. Then he shakes the sieve to sift it out. After a hardening treatment, it's into an oven to bake slowly. This gets rid of the brittleness and relieves internal stresses. A technician then scrutinizes the razor to confirm that it's straight. If it's not, he hammers it straighter. Another worker grinds the blade, angling it down to the cutting edge, using a series of abrasive wheels. He tests the edge against a thick metal band. It needs to be as thin as aluminium foil, yet strong and flexible. The next worker brushes asphalt lacquer onto the blade and the upper part of the handle known as the tank. This coating prepares the surface for laser etching. It allows the computerized laser beam to cut cleanly into the metal with no bleeding around the edges. So the trademark insignia and art look crisp. A worker then paints a little more lacquer around the etching to prepare the blade for the next step, gold plating. The blade is dipped into a mix of water and gold, and a current of electricity is run through the mix. This causes the gold to gravitate to the exposed, unlacquered section of the blade and adhere to it. The lacquer has served its purpose and can now be cleaned off in a chemical bath to reveal the now glossy 2-toned blade. Next, they sandwich the tang of the razor blade between the 2 plastic parts of the handle, using a long pin to hold everything together. They then shorten the pin, cap it, and hammer the cap down to secure it. The installation is now tested. The next worker grinds the entire blade against a slightly concave abrasive wheel, sharpening it while maintaining the sloped profile. She then hones the cutting edge against a whetstone, tests it against a cow horn, and then hones it again. This last step makes the edge razor sharp. She immerses the blades in chalk, which absorb moisture to prevent rusting. She now strokes the cutting edge against a leather strap. This is called stropping. It gives the blade its final polish. And she now removes a single artificial hair from a bundle and confirms that this straight razor is sharp enough to slice it in two. It takes a total of 80 different steps to manufacture a straight razor. Properly maintained, a straight razor should last for decades. Making it the ultimate time shaver. I thank you. It's common to many European cultures. The French call it boudin noir, the Spanish call it morcilla, and the Italians call it sanguinaccio. And in the United Kingdom, it's imaginatively called black pudding. What is it? A savoury dish made from pig's blood and other ingredients. Lovely. In England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, black pudding is typically served sliced and fried as part of a traditional breakfast. Its roots are in ancient times, when people wouldn't waste any part of a slaughtered animal, not even its blood. Black pudding also contains several dry ingredients: barley, allspice, dried onions, spices and other seasonings, and wheat flour. The pig's blood is also in dried form. They begin by filling cotton bags with barley and submerging them in boiling water overnight. The bags are porous, so the barley absorbs the water, swelling and softening as it cooks. Once the barley is ready, they drain the water out of the cook tank. Then cut open the bags and empty the cooked barley into a tub. The barley and other dry ingredients will make up about a third of the pudding mix. Another third is the pig's blood, and the final third is meat fat. They boil pork fat in a cook tank for 2 hours. Then they strain out the water and transfer the fat to a tub. In another cook tank, they boil smoked bacon fat for 2 hours. Then they scoop out and strain that fat and drop it into the bin as well. The scraps of meat clinging to the pieces of fat will give the black pudding extra flavour. Next, workers empty the 2 bins of fat into a mincer. Then they take dried onions and hydrate them with stock from the smoked bacon cook tank. This produces gravy. They pour this gravy along with the cooked barley into the mincer. Next, they add the flour and mince some more. Finally, they add the dried pig's blood. Besides turning the ingredients a rich colour, the blood makes black pudding a rich source of iron and protein. They mince the ingredients until the mixture is smooth. Then they transfer it to the stuffing line. A worker pumps a specific quantity into a nylon casing, then staples each end of the casing closed. This is the 340-gram retail size. The factory also packages larger formats for restaurants, delicatessens and caterers. From the stuffing line, the black puddings go into a steam cooker. Once their internal temperature reaches 85 degrees Celsius, which takes about 2 hours, they come out of the oven. Their texture is now like a dense chocolate pudding. After cooling overnight, each black pudding goes into a printed plastic bag. A vacuum machine sucks out all the air and heat seals the package. This improves the product's shelf life. From there, the puddings drop into a tank of hot water. This shrinks the plastic package tightly around the casing. Black pudding recipes vary by region. This smooth textured pudding is typical of eastern Scotland. In western Scotland, they use oatmeal instead of barley. And in the north of England, they use big, visible chunks of fat, producing a black pudding that's coarser in texture, but still bloody delicious. Coming up, we take a turn with steering wheels. And add a bit of colour with inorganic pigments. See you after the break. The earliest automobiles used a tiller for steering, a lever attached to a rudder. The first steering wheel appeared in 1894 in a car built by the Panhard Company of France. Today, the steering wheel is a multitasking component, integrating control switches and the driver's airbag. A car steering wheel looks simple enough. A stylish ring with a horn in the middle, and switches to operate the cruise control and other functions. Yet despite this simplicity, a steering wheel design undergoes years of development and testing for safety, durability, appearance, and function. The manufacturing process begins with the armature, the internal support structure. It's made of either aluminium or magnesium, strong yet lightweight metals. The factory's die casting system injects the hot molten metal into an armature-shaped mould. Once the metal solidifies, the machine ejects the casting from the mould. The metal is still hot, so a robot arm moves the cast armature to a cooling area, where cold air blows on it. They remove the excess metal left over from the casting process in one strike with a trimming die. And with that, the armature is finished and the steering wheel assembly can begin. First, a robot installs 4 rivets, the contact points for the horn system. When you press to honk the horn, the rivets complete an electrical circuit, enabling the horn to sound. Next, a computer-guided engraver marks a lot number for quality control tracking. This demonstration shows the basis of the next step. When mixed together, these two polyurethane chemicals react to each other and produce an expanding foam. By guiding this expansion within the confines of a mold, one can make this dense foam assume a specific shape, such as that of a steering wheel. The process is called reaction injection molding. They coat the mold cavity with a release agent to prevent sticking, place the armature inside, then inject the polyurethane chemicals. The chemicals react, and the foam instantly expands within the mold cavity, encasing the armature. Prior to injection, they also sprayed the mold cavity with protective paint. It tints the foam to the required colour, in this case black. It also protects the foam against wear and UV damage. The injection molding process leaves excess polyurethane on the steering wheel, so the next step is to trim it off. With the steering wheel structure complete, it's now time to install the components. These switches control the features operable from the steering wheel. Workers assemble them into housings called finishers. The finishers are molded out of plastic resin, then coated with metallic paint for a high-end look. The switch wiring has already been assembled into a unit called a wire harness. They connect the harness to the switches and install it onto the steering wheel. Then they check that everything functions properly. And if it does, they mark the assembly to show that it passes this stage of quality control. After applying a barcode sticker, they route the wiring through the steering wheel to prepare it for the final assembly on the assembly line. Next, they install spring mechanisms. These support the airbag module, enabling it to move in and out when you sound the horn. Then they attach the horn plate, to which the car maker will later attach the driver's airbag module. They take the earth wire in the wire harness and position it. Then flip the steering wheel and secure the switch finishers to the exposed back of the armature. Then they install a back cover made of plastic resin, the colour matching the rest of the steering wheel. A robot arm equipped with a camera performs a thorough quality control inspection. While the basics are the same, features vary from model to model. Higher-end steering wheels are wrapped in leather and often have extra switch controls for the audio system and hands-free phone use. Who said you can't reinvent the wheel? People have always used colour as a means of expression. Prehistoric man created paint from a mix of dirt and animal fat or spit. Over centuries, pigment production has become a lot more sophisticated. Chemical manufacturing produces synthetic mineral pigments to add colour to the products in our world. From pavers to paint to plastic and cosmetics, this is where the colour comes from: synthetic mineral pigments. They start with a salt recycled from the steel industry. In this case, it's iron sulfate, which has a bluish-green hue. They add warm water, and then they're ready for the next ingredient. High-quality scrap. It's another source of iron, and it's about to be recycled into pigment. Crane claws transfer it to the mix. Chemicals are added. Every so often, a technician scrutinises a sample of the yellow slurry. If he decides the colour or thickness aren't quite right, adjustments will be made. The slurry now flows over a perforated metal drum, with a filter cloth stretched across it, as a spray of water rinses off the salt. The fluid in this yellow slurry is sucked through the filter cloth and into the drum, leaving a more concentrated pigment on the surface, called filter cake. The filter cake falls in chunks onto a screw conveyor and ends up on the top of a towering spray dryer. Inside, machinery presses the highly concentrated pigment through the holes of a rotating disc. This causes a spray of droplets that, when exposed to hot air, dry into pigment particles. This yellow pigment is now ready to be mixed into an emulsion paint. A generous amount can produce a bolder shade. A little less, and it's more mellow yellow. To make black pigment, they start with cast iron filings, another form of scrap. This magnetic crane transfers the filings for production. And again, it will take a chemical reaction to produce the pigment slurry. The chemical reaction also generates energy that's recovered and used in the manufacturing process. They wash and thicken the black slurry on a revolving drum, just like they did for the yellow pigment. But this thick paste won't just be used to make black pigment. It will also be used to make red. For the dramatic conversion to red, the paste flows directly into a kiln, where it's baked until dry. They introduce air and increase the temperature to 850 degrees Celsius, making the black particle turn red. They transfer the red pigment to a drum, where they mix the pigment and adjust the colour properties. Then they grind it to a finer consistency. Once the pigment is packaged in paper bags, it's ready for transport or warehousing. Like sugar, pigment comes in both a powdered and granulated form. This demonstration shows the difference between the two. The powdered pigment is more clumpy and doesn't flow from the open end of the beaker. By contrast, the granular pigments are tiny microbeads that flow freely, which makes it desirable for users who want to mix pigments more easily. To test how the pigment colour red pigment a concrete substitute and compare the result to the standard to for the match. Sometimes need a real example of eggs cut up, so they add a small amount of mixer full of aggregate, water and cement. The mixer tests what the ingredients are replied. Open the lid to reveal the red brick paste. They scoop it up for transfer to a brick forming machine and then fill brick forms with the paste. They activate a plunger that tamps it down to compact it into the forms, producing bricks. Red, black or yellow, these pigments are surely colours to die for.
Is Sasquatch living in the mountains of Washington? Or is Matt's evidence nothing but a man in a bear suit? Renee's Not Convinced tonight at 9 on Discovery in a brand new and exclusive episode of Finding Bigfoot.